Okay, Tigers, welcome to a very special Friday lecture, video lecture. I've been more or less forced over onto the Macintosh side of things, and so here I am set up with this whole thing in Mac software that I don't know my way around, but it seems pretty simple and straightforward. We're about to find out if it works. Yes, we are. Okay, so slideshow, and we're going to play from the current slide. And let's have a look. It looks like it's actually, yeah, it looks like it's actually working. Yeah, okay, right on. Information cascades, let's talk about these things. They're closely related to groupthink, which we talked about in the last Friday lecture before we took our sort of like 2-class period interlude and did the Penn and Teller show. They're another socially powered way that we can put information out into the average person and get bullshit out. Don't worry, I'm going to explain the terms right now. It's not as complicated as it sounds. Information cascades, heuristics, availability cascades, etc. Let's start with heuristics. A heuristic is a sort of a mental shortcut, a rule of thumb which people use to arrive at a good enough understanding, of a complicated situation. So, for instance, when you're evaluating two political candidates, part of your mind is trying to keep track of everybody's position on this issue and that issue and examining their records and watching the debates and poring over the voters' pamphlet, and that part of your mind is really overworked. There's a lot of information to keep track of. But there's another part of your mind that's already decided that candidate A looks more presidential than candidate B. And that part of your mind applied a heuristic to the decision, something that Daniel Kahneman calls substitution. It substituted an easy question for a tough one. Instead of asking which of these candidates is better qualified, it asked which of these candidates is hotter. The last question is a heuristic question. Now, I want to mention right now a key part of the strategy behind the whole fake news thing and a key part of the persuasion strategy of the current president, for better or for worse, is to cast doubt on your ability to pick your way through all the conflicting claims that System 1 requires you to pick through and just give up and substitute System 2. You were just kind of going with your gut. Oh, I can't figure it out. They're all lying. I'm just going to go with the one that looks the best or that makes me feel the most empowered. That's a strategy, and it definitely worked in 2016, I would argue. But anyway, be aware of that as well. Again, whether or not it yields a good outcome is something I don't want to get into right now because this isn't a political class. Daniel Kahneman refers to these two parts of your brain as System 1 and System 2. System 1 is the brain that wants to vote for candidate A. No, System 1. System 1 is the brain that wants to vote for candidate A because he looks like George Clooney. System 2 is the hard-working one that you have to force yourself to use. These are not very intuitive ways to name the things. Obviously, I don't need to tell you which system is more susceptible to bullshit. The best way, I think, to remember System 1 from System 2 is that 2 is a larger number than 1 and therefore more complicated, marginally. That's the best mnemonic I can think of. It is unfortunate that Dr. Kahneman didn't come up with a better name than System 1 and System 2, but that's what we've got, so that's what we're working with. So, if you're managing the crappier but prettier candidates campaign, what you have to do is clear. Keep the water muddy so that everyone's System 2 is kept busy struggling to parse data until it gives up, and keep your candidate's simple, straightforward System 1 friendly message and appearance in front of them at all times, building warm fuzzies for System 1 and hoping the voter will give up and substitute. There's a whole litany of heuristics, starting from substitution. All of them have names. All of them represent shortcuts that the human mind has developed for coming up with good enough answers most of the time, and all of them represent weak spots in our bullshit shields. And the other thing that they do, and I'm jumping ahead a little bit, but I can't remember whether I make this point later in the show, but I want to make sure that I make it now. If you know, okay, let's give you an example. Turkey hunting. I've never hunted a turkey, but I know how it's done. You make a turkey call that sounds like a tom turkey that's challenging another tom turkey to a fight, and the turkey will come and present himself to be fought, and then you knock his block off with your shotgun from several dozen yards away. That turkey responding to that that signal, you'll recognize that from signaling theory. But because you knew what response you would get from that turkey, you were able to send a false signal that would bring that turkey in within range of your shotgun. And boom, end of turkey. And, beginning of Thanksgiving. Happy Thanksgiving, by the way. But it's exactly the same with these heuristics. You tend to respond heuristically in a predictable fashion. And so the hunter with the shotgun can turkey call you in with these things and know exactly where you're going to arrive and what you're going to do when you get there. So that's why this is so important. Heuristics are an excellent adaptation for a non-malicious universe, a universe that doesn't care whether you live or die. These are great hacks to save brain power and get the right decision made most of the time. A universe that understands how those things work and is able to twist things so that they can manipulate you with them. That's a completely different matter. Okay, back on script. The next one I want to talk about is the affect heuristic. This is the one in which you subconsciously let your emotions manipulate you. If your radiated food creeps you out, you underestimate the benefits and overestimate the risks. If you survive a terrifying plane crash, you overestimate the risks of it happening again. My example here of the affect heuristic involves the imaginary fellow named Bob, who, having driven a new Audi and loved it, is calculating whether he can afford the car, subconsciously underestimates the negatives and overestimates the benefits of being an Audi owner. Making decisions using the affect heuristic is like going with your gut, and often it's the best thing you could possibly do. But again, that requires a non-malicious or non-malevolent universe. If somebody who knows how to manipulate your gut without you realizing it gets a hold of these things, you're a puppet on a string. The anchoring effect. The anchoring effect is what happens when there's a number anywhere in sight when you're setting a prize. If I ask you, was Gandhi older or younger than 114 years old when he died? You will all say younger. Actually, why don't you go ahead and get a number in your mind right now? Just a guess. If you happen to know how old Gandhi was when he died, well, then I'm sorry, you won't be able to play. But I'm going to guess that your number is probably 80 or 90. And, but if we could turn back time, like we did earlier this month, and I'd asked you if Gandhi was older or younger than 35 when he died, again, you'd all have said older, but your guess would have been closer to 65 or 70. Statistically, maybe yours wouldn't. There's, there's an outlier everywhere. Here's another example, which I won't be able to use on you because you know what's coming. Guess the median price of new cars by all German automakers, including Volkswagen. Now, if I had said guess the median price of all new cars by all German automakers, including Mercedes-Benz, you would have come up with a different number because you're anchoring on what your impression of the average price of a Mercedes or a Volkswagen. See, I mean, it works even when there isn't a number in the room if you have a number that you can quickly fit to the situation. Now, the anchoring effect is why in some markets there's a suggested retail price for everything that nobody ever actually pays. But it's a good thing to know. Kahneman actually says if you're negotiating price with someone and they trot out a ridiculous price, that you stand up and walk out and say that you will not resume negotiations until that number is no longer on the table or in sight. It is one of those things that works whether you know it works or not, which is kind of weird and creepy, but it's true. My example here, Bob the jewelry salesman, raising the asking price on all the diamonds by 60% and putting a 50% discount sticker on them so that the customer will anchor on the higher amount and there's the perceived value of the diamonds. Representativeness heuristic. In this one, we basically say if it walks like a duck, it must be a duck. I've got a couple of examples up here. I'm going to read them to you first, right up front, because I imagine you probably were trying to read them to yourself while I was talking about other things. And Number one, it's cold as hell outside, and Bob is thinking this global warming argument is ridiculous. Number two, the Milwaukee Brewers scout signs Bob on the team because he looks and plays like Pete Rose did at his age. Okay, so this is often accurate when we say, old guys in Buick Park Avenues usually drive slowly when they're not mistaking the brake for the gas and plowing through bus stops. People who smoke meth are usually self-destructive and dangerous. People who attend college are usually young and smart, but, sometimes it's not. For instance, you see a well-dressed woman wearing glasses sitting at the bus stop reading Shakespeare. Is it more likely that she, and answer this question in your mind, if you will, is it more likely that she's a graduate student in English literature or an undergrad in one of the science and engineering schools? You will have gathered that this is a trick question. The fact is, there are about 10,000 science and engineering undergrads and about 20 graduate students in the English department. But because she represents a stereotypical English grad student, your mind naturally goes there. She is a representative specimen of an English graduate student, so your system one just goes, oh, here, look, English student. The most famous example of the representativeness heuristic at work is a story about a woman called Linda. I'm an imaginary woman called Linda. Here's the setup, and play along for the heck of it, just in your own mind. You don't have to admit anything. Linda is 31 years old, single, outspoken, and very bright. She majored in philosophy. As a student, she was deeply concerned with issues of discrimination and social justice, and also participated in anti-nuclear demonstrations. Got your picture of Linda in your mind? Good. Now, which of the following is most likely to be true? Linda is an elementary school teacher. Linda is active in the feminist movement. Linda is a bank teller. Linda works in a bookstore and takes yoga classes. Linda is a bank teller and is active in the feminist movement. Okay, you guys probably are already kind of like on radar for this one, because we kind of set it up. But statistically, most people you hit with this question answer E, which is weird, because not because they don't understand that bank tellers who are active in the feminist movement is a subset of both bank tellers and of people who are active in the feminist movement, and of course no subset can be larger than the parent set, right? They get the answer wrong because the description of Linda is representative of what they think a person like that should look like, or should be like. System 1 just shoots them right to that answer. Now, it may not have shot you right to that answer because I kind of primed you for this kind of trickiness. And if not, well, congratulations. Very few people actually do that. And you probably, to be honest with yourself, you probably wouldn't have gone straight there if you hadn't been primed for it either. I didn't the first time I was exposed to this stupid question. But anyway, the familiarity heuristic. Familiarity doesn't always breed contempt. Sometimes usually, in fact, it breeds comfort and trust. Okay, so the example. Bob has taken a multiple guess midterm. Question 7 has him stumped, but he has a good feeling about C, Martin Van Buren. So he marks it down, and then he gets home and realizes that he just moved into a house on Martin Van Buren Street, and that's why it was familiar to him. So yeah, when following this shortcut, we go with whatever feels familiar to us. An experiment at the University of Michigan demonstrated this effect. This experiment, I will say that there's at least a red flag on it. I'm skeptical of this, and we'll talk about bullshit in academic studies in week 10, and maybe you'll see why. I'll explain why now, but you'll kind of see. So here's the story. The researcher placed a series of display ads in the student newspaper on the front page, each ad containing just a single Turkish word, a word in the Turkish language. Some words ran only once, others ran on 25 different days, and at the end the researchers did a survey with the students. Given a list of words, including all the Turkish words, did they think the words meant something good or something bad? And there was a correlation. The more times the given word had run in the paper, the more likely the students were to guess that it was something good. The reason I'm skeptical about this is because most people, when they see an ad in the paper that they don't understand, don't actually read it. And I don't know. There are cognates in Turkish. I'd have to look up the study to see if I trust it or not. It just sounds a little pat. But anyway, that is the example of the familiarity heuristic, which isn't a true effect, whether that study was legit or not. Now, we've gone over the major categories of heuristics. There are others. There's the effort heuristics, the fluency heuristic, the scarcity heuristic. Kahneman's book is full of these, and I assigned that book in part because it's full of good information for busting bullshit, but in part because it's one of the best books written in the 21st century so far for just kind of coming to insights on how our minds work. What heuristics all have in common is the shortcutting of the full mental process, the full process of thinking in favor of something quick and dirty. There is one more heuristic I need to talk about because it's going to segue into the availability cascades thing, and that is the availability heuristic. And in this one, what happens is we make decisions based on how easily an example is called to mind. For instance, in a study in the University of Oregon Psychology Department, respondents estimated that you were 300 times more likely to die of an accident than of diabetes. In fact, diabetes, says the guy on the television advertisement says. In fact, you're 4 times more likely to die of diabetes than of an accident. But accidents get the news coverage, so examples of them are quick to our minds. You're probably thinking of one right now. Hopefully, you're not thinking of one that involved someone you love. And if so, I apologize for the triggering. I shouldn't say triggering because that's been weaponized. It's really annoying when perfectly decent words acquire these political valences. You know what I mean. Anyway, that's the availability heuristic. It's bad enough by itself, but when you mix it with an information cascade, you have a potential for some pretty weird stuff. I'm going to talk about information cascades next, but first I've got a couple more things to wrap up the heuristics section, starting with the associative principle and the priming effect. The associative principle is the idea that one thing reminds us of another thing. We associate a big smile with happy times in our lives, so if we plaster one over the old map, by golly, it reminds us of those times and lifts our mood. If we visit Grandpa in the retirement center and everybody's moving around really slowly on a walker, we drive home a little bit more slowly because we've got these associations and we've also been primed. Okay, I'm going to read the examples here. Bob has been feeling grumpy all day, and then he remembers Tony Robbins' advice and plasters on a big old happy grin. After a few minutes, he realizes he's actually starting to feel better. And example number 2, Bob's lunch keeps disappearing out of the fridge. He pastes a picture of Morgan Freeman looking disapproving on the back wall of the fridge, and it stops. Because people are primed for honesty by the appearance of Morgan Freeman looking at them. So yeah, and we also, the reason that slot machines in Vegas make so much noise when they pay out jackpots and the ones at the door pay out more jackpots is because the noises remind us of the time we scored $200 worth of nickels, and we're primed to gamble. Now, this one can be turned in the service of evil if you can figure out how to get people to associate something useful with your point or your opponent's point. The glittering generalities propaganda technique uses associative principle too, or at least it tries to. Priming is basically the associative principle in application, in action. The idea is that exposure to a thing can make you more likely to think of or do another thing unconsciously. This is what subliminal advertising was supposed to do. You flash a picture of a delicious bucket of popcorn on the movie screen for such a short time that you don't consciously notice it, but now you're primed for eating. Kahneman mentions one in which people were primed for an interaction with a screensaver of dollar bills. The people so primed sat further away from their interviewers and were less helpful when an assistant, quote-unquote, accidentally dropped a handful of pencils later. There are a variety of ways that priming study could have been tainted, however, and priming studies are notorious. Kahneman actually retracted part of his book because priming studies are so prone to failing replication. The priming appears to be a real effect, but it's very difficult to study. And it's also very susceptible of influence by the people who are conducting them. And then there are also so many other factors. For instance, if you're primed with a screensaver full of dollar bills. You're sitting in an office and you're talking to somebody and there's a screensaver with a bunch of dollar bills floating by. There's a chance, as opposed to flying toasters or something else, is it not possible that that would be off-putting, that it would make you think, well, these are a bunch of mercenary people. All they care about is the almighty dollar. These aren't my kind of people. How soon can I get out of here? And that maybe explains their attitude, and not the fact that you're primed to be greedy, right? Maybe it's you judging them instead of them judging you because you've seen dollar bills and now you just can't wait to get you some of that sweet, sweet jack. Honestly, that's how I would interpret these results. Priming studies are just terrible, but it is a real effect. It's a thing. It's just very difficult to study and figure out how much of a thing it really is. They turn out to be stunningly spinnable. There's one, the most famous one. We'll see this again soon. A priming study that found that voters who see an American flag are more likely to vote Republican, and that got a lot of airplay on Fox News, but oddly enough, it was proved impossible to replicate. Cognitive ease is the last thing I'm going to talk about before I switch over into information cascades, and before I do, I'm going to check and make sure that this stupid thing is recording, because I'm going to be completely honked off if it turns out that I've been blabbing my face off for 21 minutes, and the computer's been like, well, will you let me know when you get back, and we'll continue your video. Anyway, cognitive ease. Bob is looking for a job. Nobody's calling. He revises his resume, switches the paper from tan to baby blue, ups the font and size from 6 points to 11 points, rewords it so it has fewer unnecessary big words, and he's hired the next week. Right? Cognitive ease is the concept that, and salespeople know this concept very well. If you're comfortable and relaxed and not near the edge of your comfort zone, you'll be more likely to say yes to stuff. Right? Because saying yes to stuff brings excitement into your life, and when you're near the edge of your comfort zone, you have enough excitement. This is why salespeople try to get you to chat about stuff and answer yes to a lot of questions before they hit you with the pitch. So what they're trying to do is make a message System 1 friendly. Once you have to turn on System 2, you're lots less amenable and more likely to start turning your System 2 resources on talking yourself out of the purchase. So now you can use cognitive ease in your own communications, and I recommend it. You want to be easy to talk to and easy to say yes to, sure, but it's more important to notice when it's being deployed on you. Okay, information cascades. And I am going to punch out here and just double check and make sure. It looks like it's recording. Okay, I'm going to stop it, and I'm going to watch a little bit of it just to make sure that it's